It is a global collective failure from my perspective.
Mike Tomlin has won more games than any black head coach in NFL history. You've been in the room at the owners' meetings when this is discussed. I know you hear the right things, but as African Americans, all of us are used to hearing stuff and knowing bullshit when we hear it.
You know, I don't know if it is at the time, but I know that the results are, you know.
Yeah, a top line number for you ahead of this conversation, 1 in 32. Of the 32 NFL teams right now, there's only one head coach who's black, Mike Tomlin, who you just saw there. 1 in 32 comes out to about 3% in a league where some 70% of its players are black. Something to just keep in mind as we discuss the difference between symbolic change and real actual progress. On the symbolic side today, after years of criticism directed at a team name many considered to be racist, this morning, Washington, D.C.'s football team officially became the Washington Commanders. A golf clap-worthy gesture, long overdue, but a symbolic change nonetheless. But what about over here, curtain number 2, real change? By now, you might have heard about Brian Flores. He is a young, up-and-coming, very good head coach whose firing this season was such a shock that NFL fans and media generally agreed that he'd have no problem being hired by another team. Well, that's until yesterday. At great risk to his career, Flores filed a federal lawsuit against the NFL and 3 teams for what he says is racial discrimination. It has to do with the league's so-called Rooney Rule. That requires teams to interview at least one minority candidate for top vacancies. According to his complaint, filed in the Southern District of New York, 3 days before his meeting with the New York Giants, Patriots coach Bill Belichick sent Flores a text message mistakenly congratulating him on his new job with the Giants. So turns out the intended recipient of that text was Brian Daboll, an indication that the organization had already made up its mind about who to hire before interviewing Flores, and that the Flores interview was just a box-ticking exercise to be in pseudo-compliance with the Rooney Rule. The NFL released a statement highlighting their deep commitment to equitable opportunities before insisting the claims made by Flores were without merit. An interesting position to take before investigating any of it. The Giants organization says it is pleased and confident in its process, insisting Flores was in the conversation until the 11th hour, even though he never interviewed. Here's what Flores had to say about the lawsuit this morning.
I understand the risks, and yes, it was a difficult decision, and I went back and forth. And like I said, I love coaching. I do. It's something that I'm passionate about. It brings me joy, and I love helping young people reach their potential and become the best versions of themselves. I'm gifted to do that.
Brian,
but this is bigger than that. I think we're at a fork in the road right now. You know, we're either going to keep it the way it is, or we're going to go in another direction and actually make some real change where we're actually changing the hearts and minds of those who make decisions to hire head coaches, executives, et cetera.
Joining our conversation, Kevin Blackistone, ESPN panelist, sports commentary writer for the Washington Post, and professor of practice at the University of Maryland, Merrill College of Journalism. He's also the co-producer of the new documentary, Imagining the Indian, the Fight Against Native American Mascotting. And Jason Johnson is still with us. Kevin, I pulled in that Bryant Gumbel interview because I saw it a year ago, and I suppose it's not surprising to anyone who pays attention every day that nothing has changed. But what's always amazing is the brazenness of everyone being in on the joke, right? Hey, congrats, buddy. And but for the wrong number being entered in, Flores might not have had that seemingly significant piece of evidence that the whole thing looks like it was a scam.
Well, it was a scam. And I think that's what we call the old boy network, right? The white men who run the NFL and have run it for years. And one of the things that jumps out to me about all of this is that it was 20 years ago when Johnny Cochran, the late great lawyer, and Cyrus Mehri approached the NFL about their hiring practices and about the data that they had collected showing that it was unfair. And they had just recently sued successfully Coca-Cola on the same sorts of claims. And the NFL reacted then by developing the Rooney Rule, which you referred to, which basically said that for any head coaching jobs, and later on it became executive jobs as well, someone of color had to be interviewed in hopes of making it a more equitable process. But we can see 20 years later, the NFL is still in the same spot.
Right.
And now it's not the problem of the Rooney Rule, but it's really the problem of the people who have been entrusted to employ the rules, the ethics and the morals of the Rooney Rule. And they are quite simply unable to do that.
And Brian Flores talks about the Rooney Rule and how, he's skeptical now that it was ever intended to do what it was designed to do. And I want to play that in a second. But I want to ask you, Kevin, just to explain to our viewers who may not be avid football fans, who Flores is, and just just back up a little bit. Take me through the firing, and then what should have been a process of getting picked up again based on his record, based on his skills, by anyone, by anywhere he interviewed.
Sure.
Should have had multiple opportunities.
Yeah, he's by all means upstanding guy in the NFL, worked his way up the coaching ranks, finally got a head coaching job 3 seasons ago with a horrible Miami Dolphins team. Not surprisingly, struggled his first year, but the next 2 years, surprisingly, put together a winning team. And at the end of last year, actually went on a streak of wins and almost got into the playoffs. In fact, some people were suggesting he did such a remarkable job with such a ragtag bunch that he should be considered in the Coach of the Year running. And then all of a sudden, he got fired, despite the fact that he appeared to have the franchise going in the right direction, which is what you want out of your team. And one of the things that he revealed in his scorched earth lawsuit was that his owner, Stephen Ross, offered to pay him $100,000 per game that he would lose in the hopes that losing would get them a higher position in the upcoming draft and give them a better shot at some new hotshot player. And so being incentivized to lose and worsen your record as a black man coaching in the NFL is not really a good thing. You can see that it is a difficult thing to escape from. And if you think of, Condoleezza Rice's book, right, twice as good, which is a saying in many black households, how can you be twice as good if, in fact, your record is not going to reflect it? So it was a very difficult thing for him to do. And I think that was a very telling piece of this lawsuit.
Let me show you Brian Flores in his own words about the Rooney Rule, Jason.
I mean, the Rooney Rule is intended to, give minorities an opportunity to sit down in front of ownership. But I think what it's turned into is an instance where guys are just checking the box. And that's been the case. I've been on some interviews in the past that where I've had that feeling. There's always no way to know for sure, but And I know I'm not alone there.
We don't know for sure, but the results certainly speak, if not for themselves, speak pretty loudly. 1 in 32, Jason.
Yeah, Nicole, and to think that this all started, look, who amongst us has not sent an accidental, YUD or you up text that ended up at the wrong person? I get it. Bill Belichick sent the text message to the wrong person. But what it exposes is what anybody who's been paying attention to the NFL, and I'm a big NFL fan, has been noticing for years. You've had coaches for years saying, I know I'm going on sham interviews. I know they've already got the guy they want. They don't want to pay attention to me. It's not just Brian Flores, who I want to add, he's not just a great coach. He got the Miami Dolphins to a winning record for 2 years in a row, the first time the Dolphins had done that in 20 years. He won 4 rings with the New England Patriots. He was the defensive coordinator when the Patriots won a ring against the Los Angeles Rams just a couple years ago. He is an excellent coach. There's no reason he should have been fired. But there's a list of African-American coaches from Byron Leftwich to Eric Bieniemy who have won Super Bowls in the last 3 or 4 years who can't even get interviews. And the solution, Nicole, quite frankly, is not just this lawsuit, which I think is an important part, but we have to talk about how ownership works. These teams are being run by a bunch of mini Trumps in many cases. And it doesn't matter. They say, oh, if we can get African-American ownership in, it's not an issue of having money. I've talked about this before. In order to buy an NFL franchise, you have to have 40% of the entire value of the entire franchise up front. You got to be able to buy out your next 2 biggest partners. And 26 out of the 32 teams have to vote to let you in. So the racism inherent in many of the owners is preventing a more diverse ownership, which might result in more coaches. So this is a bigger problem than just what he's presenting. But I do think Brian Flores has definitely shaken the table, and he'll probably get paid off by the league, similar to what they did with Colin Kaepernick.
Well, and our friend Jamel Hill made that point for, again, people who don't cover but pay attention to all these stories or know to weave them together, that there's a direct line between Kaepernick and Flores. Explain that, Jason.
Well, what happened with Colin Kaepernick is he sued the NFL saying, look, this is a conspiracy, a conspiracy that is preventing me from even having the opportunity to apply for a job. And the league's response was like, no, we're just 32 individual franchises and hang out and have the same jackets. But in discovery, what was shown is that you did have lots of people communicating about Kaepernick. You did have teams saying, don't hire this guy. So they ended up settling with Colin Kaepernick. But what happened in between? We also had John Gruden getting fired when it was revealed that he has sent tons and tons of racist emails and messages back and forth. And even Gruden is saying, hey, you're not going to scapegoat me as the lone bad apple. There are lots of racists who are throughout this league. So now you've got Brian Flores, who is able to make the argument, look, qualified African-American candidates are not being given the opportunity to even compete for these jobs. I've got people showing up to my interviews who appear to be drunk. I've got people showing up late. And in contrast, you have white candidates, 38, 39-year-old guys who've never coached a game before in their lives, who've never called plays, who are being put in charge of billion-dollar franchises. That's what Brian Flores is talking about. And I also want to add this, Nicole, because this shows how unique and how special and how much better than anybody else you have to be. We're not talking about African-American coaches who've just won Super Bowls. Many of them are former players. So you had to already be a college level or professional level athlete, which puts you at the top 1%. Then you end up winning a Super Bowl and you can't even get a call back for an interview. There's no explanation for that other than the endemic racism in the league.
Kevin, what are you to do if you're Brian Flores and you love football and you love coaching football and you're really, really good at it?
Well, you would hope you don't have to model yourself in order to live up to your dream, right? But he admitted in his lawsuit that he realizes that's something he may have already done. Oddly enough, he's got an interview coming up, maybe 2. So we'll see. We'll have to wait and see how it works out. But, the progeny of enslaved Africans in this country have never gotten anything through altruism. It's always taken the threat of burning the house down or burning the house down in the end. Johnny Cochran and Cyrus Mary threatened to burn the house down, and the NFL reacted. Mr. Flores has now thrown kerosene in the building and lit it on fire. So we're going to see what's going to have to happen. And, to Jason's point, what do you do with these owners in the league? It's a very difficult thing to deal with, these franchises. But I'll also point out that inside of the lawsuit that Brian Flores filed is a very historical march through the racism in the league. And he points out, the government, how the government has interceded on these issues before, which has forced the league to integrate. First in 1946, after it had segregated itself, and then again in Washington, D.C. in the early 1960s, when this was the last all-white team in the league, and they were forced to integrate if they wanted to play in a new stadium that was built with federal funding.
It's incredible. We'll stay on it. Kevin Blackistone, Jason Johnson, thank you for helping us with our coverage today. Thank you very much.